So there's no doubt there are economic impacts of this deal, but there are also other implications on the diplomatic front and when it comes to national security. Less than a year ago, during the election campaign, Prime Minister Mark Carney called China the biggest security threat to Canada. So have things changed? Well, joining me now to talk more about this are Veena Najibullah. She is the Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation. Guy Saint-Jacques is the former Canadian ambassador to China, and Gary Mars, a former Alberta cabinet minister and current president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. Thank you all for joining us. Veena, I want to start with you on this one. Ahead of this trip, you had said that while Canada wants to relieve the pain that is being felt by Canadian farmers and businesses, Canada also has to do it in a way that doesn't invite further coercion. Do you think Canada achieved that today?
Well, first of all, let me just say that this was a huge move on the geopolitical chessboard by Prime Minister Carney, a bold one, a daring one, and not just the deal on EVs and tariffs, but the announcement of this new strategic partnership with China, which obviously will bring with it some economic opportunities, especially in the energy sector, as well as agriculture, but it also carries with it risks that are inherent in engaging with China, but also risks in our discussions with the U.S. We will see where that pays off, but I think it's a reflection of just the kind of geopolitical turmoil that we're living through, that Prime Minister Carney essentially made an assessment that the risk is worth taking for now, that it could be managed. We will see whether that gamble pays off.
Guy, you want to talk a little bit more about that risk? After years of frigid diplomatic relations between the two countries, what message do you think that today's deal will send to the Chinese Communist Party in terms of dealing with our country?
Well, I think it's clear that they wanted to improve the relationship, and the time that was spent between Chinese leaders and Mr. Carney, I think, was well used. Usually when a prime minister goes to China and he meets the president, he only has 45 minutes. Mr. Xi today went beyond that because he also hosted a lunch with Mr. Carney. He is perceived as a technocrat, and like Chinese leaders who are technocrat, they think they can agree on many things. But I think there is one piece of unfinished business that should be completed once Mr. Carney is back in Canada, which is to reassure Canadians that while we are dealing with China, we know that it's a difficult partner, one that not always abide by the rules, and that more efforts and resources will be devoted to prevent Chinese interference in Canada and to stop Chinese agents from harassing Canadians of Chinese origin. So, and I hope that we'll finally see this registry for foreign agents put in place.
Gary, talk a little bit about that and how important that message will be to Canada, but also about how it's being received very differently in different parts of this country because of the impacts on different industries. What do you think is your what is your assessment, I should ask you, on how the Prime Minister is trying to paint this as a win for all when it's pretty clear that Premier Ford isn't seeing it that way?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd agree with the two panelists who have said, look, the objective was to go to China and maximize our economic opportunities while not giving up anything on security and our national interests and values here in Canada. I think, by and large, the Prime Minister accomplished that. I'd say, first of all, it's a great day for the province of Saskatchewan and Premier Moe and other producers of canola in Alberta and Manitoba, and for seafood producers on both coasts of Canada. This is a good news piece. I'm certain that Premier Holt of New Brunswick, who is very reliant upon exports of seafood products, will be pleased with this event. I'd say that with Premier Ford, he's got to take this in context. The 49,000 vehicles, as was said by Premier Moe, is the same number that came in before the 100% tariffs that Canada put in. This is, to put it in context, about 1.8 million vehicles were sold last year to Canadians, and so this represents a really small part of it. And not only that, it applies to vehicles that are under $35,000 each. You don't find vehicles under $35,000 being sold in Canada. So it does give access to Canadian consumers to affordable electric vehicles.
Now, Vito, we know that the impetus of this trip was really to diversify trade away from the United States. We've seen some reaction already. President Trump's today saying that it was a good thing that Prime Minister Carney signed a trade deal with China. But does this make things more difficult with the United States when you consider the impact on certain sectors like the automotive sector and how uniquely intertwined they are?
Absolutely. I think with President Trump, we don't really know what the final outcome will be. For now, it looks like there's been no reaction. But of course, there's been reaction from other parts of the administration. So I think for that, we'll have to wait and see. But what's important to note here is that this is a provisional agreement. It's preliminary provisional agreement. And I think we need to still see how the details will be worked out. We've only seen the document from the Canadian side. There's been nothing in the Chinese government about this agreement apart from a briefing at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they essentially just spoke in general terms that there will be some reductions on canola. They talked about EVs, but then didn't really say anything about the investment provisions that Prime Minister Carney mentioned. So I think a lot of this will still need to be worked out. But when it comes to the U.S., we have to remember that President Trump is also seeking a big deal with China. And in fact, that might have been part of the calculation for Prime Minister Carney in assessing the risks or the reaction of the U.S. He was basically looking at the fact that President Trump wants to have a deal. He's traveling there most likely in April. And as recently as this Tuesday, he said that he would also welcome Chinese investment into manufacturing and joint ventures in the U.S. So we'll see how this shapes up. But I think what's also important to note here is that apart from the U.S. and also all the domestic issues and the need to clearly communicate the significance of this new strategic partnership and this new trade deal here in Canada, we also need to communicate with our allies in Europe and also in the Indo-Pacific. We have to reassure Japan, we have to reassure Taiwan, the Philippines, all those other countries with whom we also need to deepen relations, because diversification is not just going to happen by doing more with China. We can't become strategically reliant on China. We've learned that lesson. So yes, let's do more with them where it serves our interests, but let's also continue to do more with Japan, Korea, and others in the Indo-Pacific who now need to be reassured that we're not abandoning some of our earlier agreements with them.
Mr. St. Jean, or Guy, I should say, is that the way that Canada goes about this? Because I think other allies or certainly other powers may look at this and say, look, China at one point in time, not so long ago, had detained 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and then just years later, there's this sudden reset in the relationship that may give other powers, look at this and say it's a bit of a blueprint, So I guess I wonder, what message is Canada sending to the world out there when Prime Minister Carney says this is about being pragmatic, but at the same time, one can't forget the not-so-distant history here.
Of course, and I think one does not exclude the other. In fact, what I expect is that Canada will continue to work with allies, and unfortunately, I don't put the United States in that category anymore, on ways to counter coercive measures that are used by China. A good example of this was the declaration on hostage-taking in diplomatic relations that was adopted by more than 70 countries. We now have to put some teeth to this. There's work that is underway under the G7 to counter the coercive measures taken by China, and the work should continue as well. We should share information on the various tactics used by China in terms of disinformation, interference in our society to try to counter this. One other thing that I would note is that in the documents that came out of this those meetings in Beijing is this commitment to multilateralism, to the central role of the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. And I think that's a direct message to the United States that other countries are getting organized to try to maintain the main elements of the international system.
Gary, I want to go back to a phrase that's been getting a lot of attention before this deal was announced today. It was in comments that Prime Minister Mark Carney made to President Xi. He referenced a new world order. He later clarified the remarks to say that the multilateral system that had been developing the rules of the global trade had been eroding. Is that, do you think, how China will interpret it, or do you think that that phrase is now taking on a bit of a life of its own?
Well, I'd say it's probably taking on a life of its own, but words matter. And I think that the Prime Minister also had said yesterday that we have to deal with the world as it is, not with the way the world as we want it to be. And so the engagement with China is a rational one. If I were to make one criticism of it, it's that Canada probably could have spent some time before going to China, stopping off in South Korea and in Japan. And if you were to sign off deals with South Korea and Japan, two countries that have really upped their diplomatic presence in Canada and have talked about trade with Canada, if they had done that before they went to Beijing, it would have given them a little bit more multilateral leverage in dealing with China by having important allies that they could do trade with that are in the region. So, but is there a change in how the world order is working in terms of trade? The answer is yes, but we shouldn't put too much stock into it because, as the Prime Minister says, you got to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you want it to be.
Okay, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Gary Marr, Guy Saint-Jacques, and Veena Najibullah, thank you so much for joining us on Power Play today.